Good morning, everyone. My best pleasure to be here. So, let's talk about belonging. Let's start about the belonging. Belonging is starting to be a buzzword, but it's a very important concept. It's about a human need, a basic human need. And belonging has been studied in different domains and is connected to, associated to long-term contributions, long-term commitment, affective, and retention in many, many different spaces like healthcare, psychology, and social sciences. In this work, we are going to talk about the sense of virtual community. The sense of virtual community was investigated aiming to understand the communityness of an open source community. Open source community are formed by people who collaborate together, mainly using electronic, oh my God. Can you still me? Okay. Mainly using electronic communication. So the sense of virtual community includes the sense of belonging, but also includes the aspects of membership, attached communication, and exchange of social support. So in this work, we used a methodology inspired by another author that we have here. We used structural equation models, and for that, we started the methodology by creating the hypothesis. So we are now starting by creating the theory, and from the literature, we investigated which are the intrinsic motivations that can be associated with developing this feeling of sense of virtual community. Besides of that, we used also moderators, which are factors that can dampen or increase the association between the motivations and the sense of virtual community. And we also used 3 control variables of gender, English confidence, and tenure. So in the next step, after defining all the hypotheses based on literature, we started to create the measurement model. What is that? The measure model is the questionnaire itself. How are we going to measure the constructs investigated in this model? So for the sense of virtual community, we used a theory from the psychology from Anita that includes membership, questions about membership, influence, integration, fulfillment of needs, and shared emotional connection. The intrinsic motivations were grouped on 3 types. The social motivation that included kinship and altruism, the hedonic motivations, which are feelings of enjoyment and fun, and the moral motivations, which included reciprocity and ideology to contribute to a project, an open source project. The English confidence was measured by 4 types of aspects of confidence. So we asked about the confidence to perform reviews, the confidence during non-technical and technical discussions, and also the confidence when speaking face-to-face. And we also had the demographics. So we defined the questions together with the Linux kernel community members, and we defined the tool and created the questionnaire. So the next step was collecting data. There was a survey. We worked together with the Linux Foundation. This was a project that was based and sponsored by the Linux kernel. The recruitment was done by the community managers, sending an email to the contributors and asking for them to answer. There was no compensation for that. It was all volunteer. And I also presented the project in a Linux event for the contributors to understand what was going on, what was going to be asked. The data collection dured 1 month, and the analysis included, we received about 300 answers, and after data cleanup, we had 225 in the data set. So the first step was to evaluate the questions, if the questions were really able to measure the constructs. We had 2 latent constructs that included different questions. So the sense of virtual community was composed by 5 questions, and the English confidence, as I showed in the previous slides, was composed by 4 questions. And in the theoretical model evaluation is the time that we finally evaluate if our hypothesis holds. So if the associations that we have driven during the theory development, if they are significant, if they are positive or negative. So we could see that, in summary, the social motives and the hedonic motives are positively and significantly associated with a sense of virtual community. And what happens with the moderators is the power distance, which was a moderator we measured to understand authoritativeness, because the Linux kernel is well known by being very authoritative community. So we took the country, and from the country we took the value for the power distance index to understand how can a person that is surrounded by an authoritative place or authoritative culture can have this association between the intrinsic motivation and the sense of virtual community reducing. So yes, it reduces. When you live on an authoritative country, you have a less association between the social motive and the sense of virtual community. We also asked about being paid during the survey. And then we asked, are you being paid to contribute? Because open source has a mix of paid and volunteers. So we asked if the contributor was being paid, and by that, we understand the intersection of intrinsic and extrinsic factors. So we could see that when being motivated by fun, by enjoyment and fun, which is hedonic, and being paid, the being paid reduces the sense of virtual community. So this is the moderation that we analyzed. How can being paid and authoritativeness reduce or increase? Both reduce the sense of virtual community when associated with the intrinsic motivations. Also, we used the 3 demographics. So gender minorities tend to have less sense of virtual community. The tenure and English confidence. Tenure we measured by the time the person started to contribute to the kernel. The tenure, as much tenure, so more sense of virtual community you feel. So we understand that you surpass the initial barriers and then you can develop this feeling to the community. And the more English confidence that you have, and English is the main language of the Linux kernel, the more confidence that you have, the more sense of virtual community you do have. And for those, we were analyzing the observed heterogeneity of data. How is splitting the data. So next, we wanted to do an analysis of what was the unobserved heterogeneity. What are the differences in the data, the splitting that we don't know. To split the data into clusters, and we used an algorithm that aims to maximize the R-square. And for that, and after that, we could see the data had 2 segments. And the first segment, the first group, they have only hedonic motives. They don't have other motives associated with the sense of virtual community. And for that group, tenure is positively associated with the sense of virtual community. And then we understand that the second group is the group that had only social motives associated with the sense of English confidence also is positively associated with the sense of virtual community. And this is very interesting, because if they want to be socially connected to the community, the language is very important for them. Being confident with the language to communicate and collaborate is very important to them. Future work. So as you could see, we analyzed three categories of intrinsic motivations as associated with the sense of virtual community. There can be more antecedents, and there are consequences of that. So we are now analyzing what happens when you have a higher or a lower sense of mutual community. Do people leave? Do people stay? Do people collaborate more, contribute more? What happens? What are the consequences? We are also working on projects on how to cultivate the sense of mutual community. So how can you increase? How can you cultivate? And it's important to understand the differences between demographics, because for some people, cultivating can be different than others. And we are evaluating in other communities. So this work was strictly done with the Linux kernel contributors, and we are planning to run the same and compare the results with other communities. And industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Bianca. We have time for questions.
How do you extract or get the information about gender from the community?
We asked how gender do you identify? We had a question about that. How then gender do you identify? So we had binary and non-binary options, and also the question was optional, so we used only the ones that answer.
Do you plan to continue? Do you plan to include any other underrepresented groups in your future work, or you will stay with gender?
No, we do. Yes, yes. We have to be more restricted in terms of number of questions, you know.
Yeah.
So the demographics were really tied to the initial interest of the software. I am a part of the steering committee of the software development and diversity inclusion of Linux Foundation. And the initial interest was to understand the gender, and it was also part of my PhD to understand how to increase women, but they are also including new questions in them. Okay. Yes.
Great.
And the intersectionality of those which are
Fantastic. Thank you.
First. Go ahead.
My question is, how was the process of the data cleanup? You mentioned that we went from 300 to 200, and I wanted to know what happened this week.
Thank you for your question. So for this technique, we should not use blanks. So I had to remove all the questions that had blanks. And why didn't I use any algorithm to fulfill the blanks? Because for the cluster analysis, it's not recommended to use the algorithm. So we had the blanks, and we had the I'm not sure option, because the community manager wanted to have this. We had I'm not sure. I had to remove all the I'm not sure and all the blanks.
Interesting study. Do you think the number of people from the community that a given number really knows physically, I mean, because met in conference
If
or
they
something
know,
like that, is really relevant or not? And is it the community is purely virtual, or a member has a notion of the virtual community as a kind of extension of the real physical community? Have you studied these effects, or?
the sense of mutual community instrument is based on a sense of community instrument. So, what happens is that for the open source community, they mainly collaborate online, and this is why we use the instrument of the virtual community and not the physical community. But it's like ICSE, like we could understand the ICSE community a little bit like that. We have a meeting every year, but we mainly collaborate during the year virtually. I don't know if I answered your question. Can you elaborate on that?
From my experience, my sense of belonging to a given community is very much determined by the fact that I know a few people. I really know a few people, and I engage in the community because of that. And it is totally different when I don't know nobody from the community.
Yeah.
So that is the point I would like to.
Yeah, one of the questions that is included in the sense of mutual community construct is about being known and no other peoples of the community. So it's included in the instrument.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so, Bianca was messed up. Unless it's super quick, I don't know, maybe we're running out of time, so we can catch up with the coffee break. So thank you again, Bianca, for your talk.
Hi, everyone. Glad to be here and share with you some research that I did that was kind of a study by accident. It really, well, actually, before I get started, I wanted to point out is that if you're interested in getting the slides, this is all published on my website, learnbyfailure.com/cognitive reflection. And so when I said it kind of happened by accident, it happened when I was reading a book that has nothing, at least directly, to do with computer science. Thinking Fast and Slow, you may have heard of. It's an international bestseller by Daniel Kahneman, who is a Nobel Prize-winning economist. And there's a lot to discuss in it, but if I was to water it down a bit, a key aspect throughout his book is this idea is that decision-making can really be described of a system of two different systems. System one is this fast and reflective thinking, and it tends to be strongly influenced by emotions and intuitions. And then there's system two, which is more deliberative, slower, but results in more rational decision making. And so as I was reading it and some research that was circling around it, I ran into Shane Frederick's research that was really motivated by that Nobel Prize winning research in economics that looked at how people have a propensity to depend more on system one or more on system two relates to cognitive biases and behavioral economics, which showed some interesting things, but particularly Frederick developed this thing called the cognitive reflection test, or the CRT, which was a brief 3-question quiz that gives you a series of trick questions where there is an intuitive response, that is, something that many people will think of as their first immediate answer if they don't use that system 2 thinking to think through the actual rational response. So one of the questions on the CRT is, a bat and a ball cost $1.10 in total. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Now, your intuitive response may be, oh, well, we've got 110, we've got $1, the ball costs at 10 cents. But that's the incorrect answer. The real solution is that the ball costs 5 cents and the bat costs $1.05, which would illustrate this ability to come to that answer through inhibiting that intuitive response, that gut feeling that you know the answer without actually rationally thinking it through. And so the test is really modeled after those types of questions. Now in behavioral economics, they found some interesting things like poor scores in the CRT were inversely scores were inversely correlated with things like the gambler's fallacy, sunk cost fallacy, and some others. But as I was reading it, I started to think to myself, this sounds kind of familiar. And I see it in a lot of my software engineering students, is that they seem to just like go with whatever their first rationale is. So I started to think, what are ways that this cognitive reflection skill might really play a role in software engineering? And the first thing that really came to mind, well, first thing that came to my mind, maybe using that intuitive response, because my dissertation was on software testing, was, this sounds like good software testers really think thoroughly through a problem rather than just thinking, oh, what are the first few happy path tests we can write? But then the more I thought about it, I saw this kind of decision-making process happens a lot in software engineering, is you need to verify whether you want to accept that code or not. And so another way that's adopted in code review or any other aspects of when you're looking over a potential solution and deciding whether or not it's acceptable to you or not. And so with this inkling, I decided to experiment with my students and run a study. And so I had 2 semesters of a undergraduate software engineering class complete the cognitive reflection test, but also I gave them a couple additional questions attached to that. First, and those two additional questions were in this format where I gave them a description of what a function is supposed to do in comments, and then gave them a C++ implementation of that and asked them to determine whether or not that implementation met its criteria that's been provided. And so in this example, it was simply a is palindrome function that checks to see a case insensitive version of a string is the same spelled backwards and forwards. And the interesting thing is this implementation was actually extracted from one of my introductory level programming problems, because one of the students turned this in and my initial reaction was, no, this is the wrong response. But when I actually tested it out, found out every single test case that I had for it passed. And so it wasn't, and there's criticisms that you could levy against this implementation from a stylistic standpoint, or recommendations you might give to refactor, but from a behavioral standpoint, it actually does pass all of the criteria for the function. And so here's a case where something that really should be accepted, where my gut response was, oh, this should not be accepted. And similarly, another function that I extracted from an introductory level programming assignment was, given 3 numbers, sort them in descending order. Now, this has a lot of the components of what you may consider a good working solution to it. In fact, this implementation actually works for a lot of situations. It does comparisons in between each of the 3 numbers pairwise. And even if you look at the interior to the then blocks of each of these if statements, they all perform a swap correctly. However, one of the cases where this does not work is where those numbers are actually already in descending order, that it actually accidentally misses them up. So this is another scenario where it has some components and your gut reaction may be, yeah, it looks just about right. It does at least some of the pieces that I'm looking for, but this actually would introduce some bugs into our code. So then after they went through this exercise, my students were introduced to a 3-week module learning how to write unit tests, use coverage, everything kind of surrounding that space, and trying to adopt best practices in becoming a good software tester. But following that 3-week module, we had an exam on unit testing where students were provided an entire class, again in C++, to both implement and test given the descriptions of that class. And then so what I did is provided those implementations that students provided. I categorized their implementations as either acceptable, that is, they met all the criteria I was looking for, or buggy, but then also took all of those different implementations in the 2 different corpora of acceptable solutions or buggy solutions and ran every single student's tests against every single different implementation and saw if they matched up with the classification, and calculated the accuracy of each student's suite of unit tests. And we came up with this with 2 different elements of accuracy. So here on the x-axis, you can see what's often considered as one of the major things in assessing the quality of tests is how many of the bugs did it catch? So of all those buggy implementations, how many of the tests had, or of the test suite had at least 1 failure? And so that describes the x-axis, but here on the y-axis is actually an often overlooked part of testing is, well, is this test really accurately describing the problem itself and not imposing either additional complications or other things that actually aren't part of the specifications? So that is, given a good implementation that exhibits the behavior that is expected, do your tests pass all of those? And some of my previous research found that a lot of novice students have a problem with that. And so to jump quickly through the results, I'm not going to pour into all the data because I'm running a little short on time, but the CRT was actually not a significant predictor in either manually or through software tests affirming good implementations. In fact, there was no correlation at all in between CRT in the accuracy of unit testing. However, the interesting thing that I found was in this first study that CRT was a significant predictor of when the students were looking at that code problem that had a bug in it, the likelihood of them catching that bug had a significant positive correlation with their CRT score. And again, I can go through the details a little bit more in the paper, or perhaps in answering some questions, but I tried to address some threats to the validity in a replication study of this using different problems and using a variation of the CRT, and found more or less the exact same results. That it related to students' ability to manually identify a bug in the solution, but there was no relationship that I could find in between this cognitive reflection skill and the quality of their unit tests, nor in the relationship between CRT and their ability to correctly identify an implementation that does meet its behaviors. So with the 10 seconds that I have remaining, I wanted to first kind of pose to you the question of how would you interpret these results, because they caught me by surprise. So think about that for a couple seconds. But then I wanted to pose to you my interpretation. There's a few different interpretations that are possible, but I would pose at least the possible explanation is going through the actual motions of writing a unit test forces a person into cognitive reflection. You can't write a unit test purely based off of emotion, purely based off of that gut reaction. It at least takes a moment to actually cognitively walk through, the operations involved in a unit test, actually invoking the method and asserting its results. So that's my hunch, is that this may demonstrate some evidence that unit testing by itself can overcome these inhibitions or overcome any weaknesses that you have in any to depend on your intuitions on functions rather than on objective analysis of it. But with that said, I'll stop there and see if you have any questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks for that presentation. My experience as a software manager is that when we deal with very experienced developers, they tend to somehow think that their opinion matters more than the machine. So you made this experiment with students. How do you anticipate this into a real software production in an industry scale?
It's an interesting question. Obviously, so the question, if you couldn't hear, was essentially, how might this translate into industry, into the real world, when someone's a professional software engineer? I don't know. I'm not going to guess more than what my evidence suggests, but from anecdotes, I have seen a propensity, particularly among some of my stronger students, is they almost second guess the criteria, or the specifications of a function, is they think, oh, I wouldn't design it that way. I would impose these additional things. And that may come into conversation if you want to propose additional specifications, but not so much if you're saying, I'm adhering to this particular contract. So that's a great experiment I would love to do in the future, but that's my guess.
We have time for one question for sure, and maybe
Thanks a lot, very interesting. I missed the English language interpretation of this, so let me try one and please correct me.
Sure.
Are you saying that the more people rely on their intuition, the more they're likely to miss bugs, say during something like code review?
Yes, at least among students, that would be the case, is that if there's a bug, they'd be more likely to accept that code if it exhibits some elements of what they're looking for.
And this CRT test gives you a measure of how much people rely on their intuition versus think more deeply about the underlying problem.
And indeed, and in fact, one thing I kind of glossed over quickly is CRT is this brief quiz. And one thing I was worried about when I got my initial results was CRT, because it was cited in this best-selling book by a Nobel Prize winning economist, I thought, There's actually quite a bit of exposure to it. Some people might have benefited from previous exposure. So the replication study actually used alternate versions of it. There's other researchers who have more recently published alternative versions that are a little bit less dependent on math as well. Because I suspected that might have been an option, but got the same results. So, yeah.
Just a very brief comment. Kariana Pretorius has looked at a combination of rationality and intuition in design, and she has observed gender-related differences. In particular, for women, combination of high intuition and rationality was more beneficial than for people of other genders. So if you are replicating this, you might consider including gender as one of your variables.
Absolutely, yeah. That sounds very interesting to explore more.
Okay,
all right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And here we go again. So, changing heads. First study was about open source community. Now I'm going to talk about a study that I ran in the industry that I'm working on. Burnout is also a very sensitive word, very extensively researched, and started to be very researched also in the software engineer community. And burnout is is a well-being and psychological state that is associated with retention. Also very attached to as a motive to leave a company. So it's understood on the great resignation moment that we live, especially in COVID. So burnout is being very, very studied in the workplace environment. And there is a great influence of the culture. So there is a great influence of where you are working, how you are working, with who we are working, what is happening there. It's because I'm so short to be here. So, yeah, so and what is, thank you. I like to walk. What is connected with the burnout that we investigate in this study is culture. So we studied the organizational culture to understand how do teams work, software delivery teams work. And we used a typology of organizational culture created by Ron Westrum, he's a sociologist. And in this typology, there are 3 types of culture in the team culture or organizational culture. One of those is the pathological culture, and then there is low cooperation, the messengers are short, the risks are avoided, and failure is scapegoating, and novelty is crushed. In the middle, we have bureaucratics. So bureaucratic cultures, they are not so bad as like pathological, but they are modest. So the messengers are still neglected. The risks are narrowed, not avoided, but not encouraged. And in the generative culture, and this is the top one, the cooperation is high. The messengers are those who bring bad news. So messengers, they are trained. The risks are shared around the teams. Failure is to inquiry and not to guilt. And the novelty is enacted. So we used the organizational culture based on the Western culture to understand the culture of the team. And what for? Because there is a previous work that proved that the worse or the more pathological culture in the team, the higher burnout. So we draw in the previous research from Google that showed that organizational culture leads to less burnout. And what we did here, we opened this box. So we wanted to understand how does a culture leads to less burnout. So we answered two research questions here. How are they related, the culture and burnout? And also, if this relationship, if this varies against gender and leadership positions. So those were 2 things that the company wanted to understand to improve team culture and also reduce attrition. very similar to the previous methodology. So we started by creating the hypothesis. First, in understanding how do organizational culture leads to more belonging, leads to a climate for learning, also leads to inclusiveness in the team. So see that we are opening the box between culture and burnout. After those three aspects, we also understand how those three brings more work satisfaction related to the job, and the burnout. And what happens is that this company is worldwide, so it's very interesting for them to understand how do the national culture also influences the less or more burnout in the team. So during the measure definitions, we used existing instruments and questions where was possible. And this is interesting for the industry. We respect the industry, the company interests and restraints. So some of the questions were reviewed by the HR and the company. Burnout is still a sensitive topic, so it's hard to create these questions inside the environment. And we used available demographics. The data collection, the recruitment was done through internal communication, so all the HR sent the communication to the users, and the managers invited and encourages everyone to answer. It was not obligatory, it was not mandatory questions and not questionnaires. And there were several presentations about the project and the questions to the employees during 2 weeks. We collected data during 1 month, and the data analysis after cleanup had 3,281 answers. The demographics, they are associated with the demographics they represent the company's demographics. So we had like 25% women and 75% men. We didn't have other genders in this data set because unfortunately we had to rely on the data that was in the HR data set that doesn't include other genders. And the leadership, only 9% of those play a leadership role that can be manager, director, or so on, and 91% are not leaders. And we also have more, most of the people are new to the company, so 45% started working in the company 2 years ago. So the measurement evaluation was similar to the previous study. We follow the tests to understand if the questions load properly on each of the constructs and properly and better than in other constructs. So we had, in this case, we had, the previous one had 1. In this case, we had 4 latent constructs. So organizational culture, climate for learning, work satisfaction, and burnout, they are latent constructs measured by different questions. And when evaluating the hypothesis, we could see that, yes, organizational culture brings more belonging to the team, more inclusiveness, and a better climate for learning. We also could see the relationship with work satisfaction and the reduction to burnout. So more satisfied, less burnout the people are. The national culture I'm going to talk in a minute. And the last step of this one, the previous, if everyone was here, the previous one, after looking at the hypothesis, we did cluster analysis. In this one, we did multi-group analysis. So because the company wanted to understand how do the entire model behaves against different genders, and how does it behave against leaders and non-leaders, and why? Because the company can drive different actions for different genders, for those who are leaders and non-leaders. So we create the groups, we evaluate the invariance of composite models, and then we can see the differences, they must be attributed to the theory instead of the constructs. So we created the groups of men and women, because was the data that we have, and those who are leaders and non-leaders. And this is the results. So what do we do with the multi-group analysis? We can understand, doing parametric tests, what are the significant differences between the groups. So when we compare men and women, we can see that for women, inclusiveness is more important. So we could see that a culture brings more inclusiveness for women than for men, and inclusiveness is twice more important to the work satisfaction for women than for men. We could see also that the climate for learning brings work satisfaction for those who are not in leadership positions. So those who are members of the team, not in leadership, they are really satisfied by learning. They want to learn. And the national culture, in this case, we used the 6 dimensions of national culture from Hofstede. And the only national culture that made a difference to reduce it even more the burnout was the masculinity national culture. In this aspect, it was significant for men. So for men, it's even being more reduced when men are satisfied in masculine cultures, they are even less burnout. So this is more important for women, for men in national culture. And the masculinity in national culture is very competitive by nature, and then we do interpret this. Oh, let me stay here. So we do interpret this as an heroism. So we understand that in masculine culture, when they are satisfied, they feel they are successful, which is very encouraged for men in masculine cultures. They are even less burnout, even less. And we could see that the power of organizational culture, so we could see a very high H1 to belong, H1, H2, and H3, they are very high values of path coefficients. The power of the organizational culture brings to the environment. So, yes. In generative culture, there are blameless post-mortem. So the errors are not crushed. The messengers can bring bad news. It's okay for you to failure, and failures are learning opportunities instead of bad things. And in those kind of cultures, we need to break down the silos and share the risks and responsibilities. The company is now creating trainings based on the Western culture to the teams. And then what next? We analyzed some factors, so we are now going to analyze more factors that leads to burnout or less burnout, and also the effect or the consequence of less burnout in performance and productivity. More factors that are being evaluated now include more measures to belonging, engagement, psychological safety, autonomy, and work-life balance. We are doing this right now. And how does the performance happen before or after? Is that like high performance brings more burnout, or is that being burnout you are less performing? So we are analyzing the both parts of it. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Bianca.
Thanks for the presentation. So, in one of your first slides, you have those 3 categories.
Yes.
For pathological management, the third one I cannot remember exactly. What caught my attention is that the reference for that thing is 2004.
Yeah.
So it's almost 20 years old, and we have a lot of things happening in between, especially like COVID.
Yeah.
Did your study reveal that we're going to have more categories there, or do you understand that those 3 things are still valid? Or would that compromise the results of your research?
Yeah, thanks for your question. So we used this topology because this topology, although it was created in 2004, it's being recently applied to the software delivery performance. So Google, we can see in Google Dora, it's a framework of understanding the performance of software delivery. This is the framework being used every single year. So it's old, but still being used.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We got another question?
Quick question, did you get any chance to address the potential issue of reverse causality so that organizations that have a little burnout might get a certain culture?
Yes. So we tried the both, so inverse. And we wanted also to include the mediation analysis. We could see it causes through all the pathway. So the reverse, it was not holding for the data set that we had. And it's also not part of the theory of Google research. It's also like, but I have been researching the organizational culture in different ways. So I have also used it as a moderator. So you could see, for example, high performance can bring burnout, but it can be reduced when you have good culture in the team. So the moderator could dampen this association, you know. So yes, we tested with data set inverse, but no. However, the culture can you know, in different ways. Thank you for the question.
Good morning. My name is Italo. I'm going to present the title of our work called Designing for Cognitive Diversity, Improving the GitHub Experience for Newcomers. So first, as we already know, GitHub is a widely well-used open source platform used to host many open source projects. But even though GitHub is not a perfect platform, here I bring some quotes from Twitter from some users complaining about how they were struggling, how they feel confused on how to use GitHub. And also, like, when I was looking for this kind of quotes, I just found one user saying that GitHub is very intuitive. It can be for some users, because as we already know, people are different. A system that can be easy to use for someone could be hard to use for another person. And due to that, literature also reports that many newcomers face many challenges in understanding how to use GitHub. Here we have more quotes. I have another quote here with this GIF saying, "What a fork." Like, unfortunately, it's in Portuguese. It's someone complaining that, like, when they use GitHub in Portuguese, the fork button is to fork, and this doesn't mean anything for us in Portuguese. So, like, it's kind of hard for the users to understand. We also saw that when we are running our experiments, like we run our I'm going to talk more about later, but we also run with some students from Brazil, and they kind of feel confused when they saw this fork button because they didn't know what the button do and have no idea how to use it. So we have many past studies in the literature that try to investigate how tools and in open source can create gender bias barriers for newcomers. And also we see that minority groups as women and underrepresented groups are less represented in open source environments. And these people, unfortunately, face more barriers because due to their differences. So the idea of our work is to show how these newcomers struggle when they try to use GitHub. And to do that, we try to answer these two research questions, like what inclusivity bugs does GitHub pose for newcomers when trying to make their first contribution, and the effects of fixing, what are the effects of fixing those inclusivity bugs. So our method is divided in 3 steps. First, we identify the GitHub inclusivity bugs. Then we propose some fixes, and then we assess the fixes that we propose running an empirical study. So to identify the GitHub inclusivity bugs, we use the gender mag method that is widely used in open source projects and commercial products to investigate and about inclusivity bugs and removing those bugs from this kind of softwares. Here we have the link to access the GenderMag project and learn more about it. So the GenderMag is based on 5 cognitive facets, and they divide users in 3 personas, but here we're going to talk about the two opposite personas in the study. So we have a user called Abby that's motivated to use technology by what they can accomplish, whereas we have a persona called Teen that's motivated to use technology by enjoyment or fun. And also Abby processes new information like comprehensively. So this kind of user likes to see tutorials and have information before starting using the software, while the other persona try to look for new information, but like is going to select which information is relevant just to finish the tasks that he has to do. And the difference between the two users is like one has lower computer self-efficacy and the other one has a higher computer self-efficacy. And this can impact on how the user is using the software. And also one has more risk averse and the other one is less risk averse on trying to use new things and use new features in the software. And one prefer information and learning by like process-oriented learning, and the other one like to play with the technology and learn for fun, like just tinkering. So in the step 2 on our research method, we propose the fixes. So first, in the previous step, we run the GenderMag, we evaluate, we do a cognitive walkthrough to see how users that has these different personas will use GitHub. And then based on that, we found some GitHub inclusivity bugs. And then on the second step, we propose those fixes according to what a user with this kind of persona would have faced as a challenge. So here, just a few examples I'm going to talk more about in the next slides. So here we have the original GitHub interface. And for a user that process information comprehensively, it's kind of hard to find the README file because the README file can appear in any position here in the GitHub interface, depending on the open source project. So in order to help those users that need this information that are presented in a comprehensive way, we propose a new tab on the GitHub project, like called Home, and then we would print the README. We would present the README file directly to the user, because that would be an important file that all the open source projects have to show their information. And also we would include this tooltip that highlights to the user that he can edit the README file and go on and propose a pull request. So here we found 12 inclusivity bugs in the first step, and then we proposed the changes for the tasks that we choose 4 tasks, and then between these 4 tasks, we found like five bugs in the first one, and so on, because these 4 tasks are related to the contribution process on when a newcomer trying to contribute to an open source project. So, and for our research question, we are going to briefly present how we propose the changes on the GitHub interface that would help those users that have a different type of cognitive style. So on the first user case where the user is supposed to submit a pull request, we include this progress bar there to to show the user that to submit a pull request, there is like some steps that he has to accomplish before finish the pull request. Because in the initial interface of GitHub, when the user tries to submit a pull request, like there's no progress bar, the user just goes and goes. And when we see in our experiments that we run with the control group, the users felt like, I already finished the pull request, like just by editing the file. So it was kind of like there's no feedback for the user. In the second slide, we ask the users to look for the files change, but like we saw that the users kind of get lost that in this menu there, like this 4 menu. So that's why we included the tooltip there to call attention for the files change and be able to guide the user to show where he can see the changes that he made in the previous pull request. So like first the user edit the file and propose a pull request, But then after that, the user didn't know if he made the change or not. In this second user case, with this tooltip, he could see, okay, now I can see the file that I changed when I submitted the pull request in the previous user case. So here we have user case 3, where we ask users to ask for help and how to solve a pull request, so how to solve an issue. So in GitHub, they have like this, okay, I have 1 minute, so I'm gonna run a little bit, sorry. So we run an experiment with 75 students for like 5 different studies, 5 different universities from Brazil and US. And we asked them to run these 4 tasks: that's submit the pull request, view the files change, and request help to solve the pull request, and also upload the file. Here we have like some results where we could see that users with the Abby persona, they were like struggling compared to users with the teen persona in tasks 2 and 3. And then after we proposed the fixes, we see that we removed this gender gap between these users with these 2 different personas and cognitive styles. Before the fixes, Abby users performed worse than teen. And after the fix, both cognitive styles achieved similar performance. In task 4, that was like upload a file, we see that in the control group, both user personas has like lower performance. But like after we proposed the fixes, both group like achieved good results. Here, after we conduct, then we ask the user, we conduct a self-efficacy questionnaire. So we ask before they start doing the tasks and after. So both groups increase their self-efficacy. And we also, but like the plugin group that used our fixes, they had a bigger increase. We also asked the participants what they think about the GitHub interface in general, the challenges that they face. And the participants mentioned that the elements included in the plugin, that was like the implementation that we did, like the tooltips, the mention icon, they helped to complete the test better. Here we have some implications of our work that directly apply to social coding platforms, maintainers, newcomers, and educators. And just to summarize, we found 12 inclusivity bugs. We proposed the fixes and also implemented those fixes in a plugin, and conducting an empirical study with 75 newcomers. On the unchanged GitHub interface in the control group, we see that Abby participants, or like underperformed team participants in some tasks. And then the difference disappear in the experimental group when that use the fixes that we propose. And that's it. Thank you.
Possible differences about cognitive diversity with gender. And when I read the title about cognitive diversity in general, I immediately thought about neurodivergence, so people that might have social anxiety or depression or any sort of mental differences. So I was wondering, is this something you considered in your study? And if not, do you think it's something that could be maybe to look into in the future?
Yes, so we didn't consider this topic, but yeah, I believe that we could include this in the users in the future studies.
Thank you.
Thanks for the great talk. And on page 6, you summarized 2 kinds of cognitive style. And I'm wondering, how do you summarize those 2 types of personnel? Thank you.
Okay, in the gender mag methods, we have a survey that we ask the users to fill out. And then based on the survey, we can categorize the users based on their cognitive styles.
maybe any effect towards this direction, to understand to what extent experience does matter in this model that is in designing.
You mean?
Do you think that with people who are not newcomers, like experienced contributors, new contributors would change in any way? Have you thought about any possible follow-ups in this direction?
No, we didn't thought about it. Like, so the idea was in working with newcomers was to see like the struggle that they face. Like, so our population was students that never used GitHub before, so it was the first time using the GitHub. So we were trying to observe the struggles like in onboarding in an open source project for the first time. But so yeah, we didn't look for experienced developers.
Okay. Then one last question.
Do you have plans for people making the onboarding in different interfaces, such as Visual Code Studio, the web development of GitHub, and other ways that people can interact with GitHub as first-timers?
No, yeah, this method can be applied in any software platform. So we thought about it like inspect other inclusivity bugs in other platforms, like could be like GitLab and other things.
Hello everyone, first of all. It's great being here. Today I'm going to briefly show you a paper done together with my colleague Andres Masacosa. He's an probabilistic machine learning expert, and Klaas-Jan Stol, who is actually the co-author of half of the paper of this session today. And he's not here, what a shame. So what was actually the goal of our research? So we have long-lasting anecdotes about developers, about why developers are actually becoming developers. And we, again, have a number of suggestions suggesting and telling us that computer scientists love solving riddles, puzzles, and so on and so forth. And why is this interesting? Well, because this actually might distort and change the field and the conclusion we draw, right? So, for example, who are the people who are actually studying software engineering at all? So how are we investigating this subject? Well, we took some well-established instruments from social psychology, namely the definition of need for cognition, which is a person's desire to engage in cognitively challenging tasks and effortful thinking. And what we basically did is we relate need for cognition with personality traits of software engineers. So what did we do concretely? We did a large-scale sample study of 483 software engineers. We used for our data collection an academic crowdsourcing platform named Prolific. We did a cluster randomized sampling with multiple quality screening and check in order to assure that our informants are indeed software engineers. We used three well-established measurement instruments, namely the Bright Personality Traits model, so the hexagon model, which is similar to the Big Five model. It just includes a sixth trait, which is honesty, humility, and contemporary research in social psychology actually consider this a much more advanced and much more nuanced personality model compared to the Big Five or Ocean model. In addition to that, we also measured the dark traits, namely psychopathy, Machiavellism, and narcissism. And for need for cognition, we used the NCS6 scale. As an analysis tool, we used multiple model linear regression with Bayesian approach to control the risk of finding spurious correlations. The results, I think, were actually quite interesting. So actually, personality traits explain 33%, so 1/3 of a variation in need for cognition. We could also find that especially bright personality traits, for example, honesty, humility, are strongly related to need for cognition, while dark traits are negatively correlated. Moreover, we also find that compared to other professional population, software engineers score significantly higher on need for cognition. So which are therefore our finding? Well, first of all, we have the strong suggestion that software engineers enter into the field because their high need for cognition, which has some clear impact related to recruiting. So to attract software professionals, organizations should provide cognitive recruitment messages and not emotional ones. Also, in terms of teaming, this has some implication in terms of, for example, team composition and how tasks are provided, and also working behavior. So we see that software engineers are very sensitive to organizational fairness, and they have a considerably high work ethic, which is also a strong recommendation on how company policy should be designed. And in 5 minutes, I concluded my presentation, and you are more than free to download the paper here, send me an email, or just check out my website. Thank you so much.
I'm a bit surprised to see one of your recommendations
to
communicate cognitive challenges rather than in an emotional way in these recruitment messages. Will it not lead to reinforcing the current software development world? We are always talking about trying to diversify the software developers community and so on. Wouldn't it just be opposed to this?
I think it very much probably depends on what is your goal. So since you have this very high and highly significant amount of need for cognition, it's how you are best going to basically address and meet the population. Having said that, I completely agree that there are a number of other aspects to consider, and this also should clearly be taken into consideration, absolutely, yeah.
It's with me. I have 2 questions. They are quick, so I'm going to ask them together. The first one is that do you think that this is applied for all of the roles in the software development team? And the second one is regarding how many people are now searching for a career in software development after working from home in the pandemic. So do you think this is applied for people like students who are there in computer science and for people who are thinking about changing careers as well? Thank you.
Excellent question. To be fairly honest, I have absolutely no idea. To be fairly honest, just to give you some more information about the data, all the data has been collected in December 2019, if I remember correctly, so before the pandemic. So this data and these results are based on the evidence back on that point, and and I suppose that we could have done or probably definitely some more research is needed, especially in terms of heterogeneity, in terms of multi-group analysis and so on. But yeah, that was actually not the goal of this paper. Yeah.
Okay, so let's thank Steinmacher for his talk.
Thank you.
Again, the journal first paper on qualitative study of developer discussion of their problems and joys during the early COVID-19 months. If you just close the PowerPoint.
Yes, if I will find my mouse.
Yeah, this is the same problem I was having earlier.
I don't have a problem with opening the files, I just have a problem with closing.
Oh, yes, it appeared again.
Okay. No, we have. I think
is this one?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. you. Just a sec. Is it playing or should I do something? Okay, so let us move to something completely different. I'm going to talk about the experiences of software developers during the early COVID months. But of course, you know, we are not the first people who have studied COVID. There has been a whole bunch of great papers published. Just put a couple of examples on the slide. What's important to understand is that most of those papers have been survey-based. Essentially meaning that we, as researchers, went and asked people specific questions, and we wanted to get specific information about the ways they experience software. To complement this line of research, we thought about trying to observe developers in a more natural environment without actually intervening in trying to get specific information. On the right, you have an example of a couple. Really, there are not that many studies that are purely observational. This is a study of Bauer et al. But they have focused solely on technical elements. If you look at the slide, you see things like number of builds, number of commits, and so on and so on. So what we essentially want, we want to have an environment where we have developers discussing or doing some kind of social things, and without us necessarily prompting them to do this. Ideally, we want to have a water cooler. We want to listen to water cooler conversations. And luckily, we have found such a water cooler. It's a platform called DevRant. There is also an app. Feel free to download. And if you look at this screenshot, you will find elements which you might recognize from something like Facebook, profile pages, ability to follow people, but also things which are more similar to Stack Overflow, right? You have posts, which are here called rants and stories and collabs. I'm not going to explain the difference between them. You have tags, you can upvotes, downvotes, all this stuff. So what have we done? First of all, we have looked at rants, at posts that use tags related to COVID. It was a bit of a complicated process to identify those tags, doesn't matter. And we observed that the earliest post appeared on January 29. On January 30, the World Health Organization has reported 8,000 COVID cases. And roughly in April, those messages started to disappear, predominantly because the communication of the COVID situation went much more subtle, right? So those things were no longer necessarily tagged as COVID-related. It became obvious that it was COVID-related. The spikes in the middle are related to March, which is essentially exactly the time when the COVID has been proclaimed to be a pandemic. In total, we got 825 posts. And then we labeled them manually. We labeled what people talk about. Here you see examples like quarantine, telework, relations with their managers, and how they have done it. So what kind of sentiment is there, positive, negative, or neutral? For those of you who are into sentiment analysis, this was a manual labeling. And those are the results. You see the categories, and on the right you see the bars ranging from black, which is negative, to light gray, which is positive. It's not surprising that most of the communication is negative. People didn't really like being in the pandemic situation. What is interesting is that the biggest groups are related to telework and relationships here are relationships with their co-workers, managers, and so on. And when we are looking at the positive side, then we see environment. Any ideas why the environment is positive? This kind of has been hinted at today already.
Work-life balance?
Sorry?
Work-life balance?
No, not really. Any idea? Environment positive? What went?
You know, it's nice being at home.
No.
Out of sight, out of heart.
Sorry?
Out of sight, out of heart. When you don't see people, it's
That would go to relationships, actually.
Less pollution.
Yes, exactly. Oh, sorry, I went too fast. Here are just two quotes. One about teleworking, kind of similar to the one we seen before. Negative, another one positive, related indeed to pollution and dust, which went down, and essentially people appreciated it. So, to summarize, what have we done? We have found our virtual water cooler and the platform called Devrant. We have analyzed 825 posts ranging from late January to mid-April 2020, with the spikes corresponding to the period when WHO proclaimed it to be a pandemic. We have manually classified what people are talking about and how they are doing it, so essentially the topics and sentiment. We see that most of the communication is negative, with the most negative elements being related to working from home and a relationship with managers. When we looked more carefully, we saw a lot of fear which was related to risks to lose a job or to lose money and so on. The only positive side to the story was indeed related to pollution. So essentially environment which got better. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the talk. So I honestly cannot quote, but as far as I know, there is such things as called like negativity bias, that these voices on the internet are usually a lot louder than the pleased ones. So what if, just because, you know, when you're happy, it's easy to keep it to yourself. What if these high negative scores are actually just because people who were happy were just silent?
It is partly because of the choice of the platform, right? The depth of rant is kind of prompting people to rant, which is, so we expected a certain degree of negativity. So if they would have been amazed by their wonderful environment, they would be much less likely to come there. What is important is the difference between them. So the fact that most of the communication is negative is not surprising. What was interesting is that indeed the most of the negativity went towards relationships and teleworking, rather than, you know, lockdown preparedness or entertainment and whatnot.
Okay, thank you.
You hinted at this in your answer to the last question, but could you give us any additional confidence that the participants on DevRant are an indicative sample, or that their behaviors might correlate with other developers? To what degree can these results generalize?
They can't. I mean, I'm sorry, by the same token, developers on Stack Overflow, GitHub, or any other favorite platform of the MSR community cannot be generalized beyond a specific sample. In this case, it's even more so because it's only 825 posts, very specific time frame, and so on.
Okay, so unfortunately we're running out of time, so I'm sure that also Alexander will be happy to take your questions during the break. So let's go to the next. Due to technical issues, we are stopping the last presentation, so I'm sorry for that, but so I would like to invite Lawrence Lucky